Welcome, everybody. I'm Rick Sterling and with Western IM, and I'd like to thank all of you today for attending our IM Canada Connect session. I just wanted to thank all the ARMA Canada chapters for their support in the IM Canada Connect initiative that's been going on now for over a year. We do a session a month, more in RIM month in April. And it lets us all have a chance to get together and learn lots of interesting things about the records and information management profession. Western IM does support the initiative, and I'm not going to work much today. I'm going to let you know that Susan Perpich is going to be the host today. And Susan, I'm going to make you work. So I'm going to turn it over to you and just let you go. I'm looking forward to the session myself, so I'm going to fade into the woodwork now. Susan, here you go.
Thanks a lot. Hi, everyone. I'm asking everyone to be gentle on me. This is my first time moderating anything on anything, really. So welcome, everyone. We're ARMA Saskatchewan, and we would like to welcome you to our panel, which is Where Worlds Collide and the Privacy Impact. So we'll be discussing the impact of privacy legislation has on information management. So I guess some of our key things that we're going to be covering is what we're going to cover how key legislation such as PIPEDA, FOIP, LA FOIP, and HIPAA affect information management practices. And we'll probably explore some best practices for managing data privacy and security and the role of information management professionals have in ensuring compliance with privacy legislation. So as Rick said, I am Susan Perpich. When the notice went out, it said that I was Records Management Coordinator for Saskatoon Tribal Council. That changed as of last week, so it was very recent. So I'm at the University of Saskatchewan now, and I work with the Student Information Systems. So we're just going to ask everyone to kind of hold their questions until the end. We have set aside some time to answer any questions, and we're just going to ask you to just pop them in the chat, and we'll try to get to them. If we don't have time, because some people talked too long or had just too many things to say, we'll take note of them and just try to get some answers out to you afterwards. So let's meet our panel. We have Ruth Ann from the City of Saskatoon. She's the Corporate Records and Information Analyst for the City Clerk's Office. We have Dan Davies. He is the Records Manager for eHealth Saskatchewan. And Kayla Tamaki, she is the Director of Information Management, Privacy and Information Management Department at SGI. That is a lot. So let's just dive into our first question here. And Ruth Ann, you're going to be up first. So can you tell us more about your organization? Where do you operate, and what privacy legislation or legislation does your organization require to follow?
Okay, so I am with the City of Saskatoon. It is a corporate body. Municipal government falls under provincial jurisdiction. A city such as Saskatoon is responsible and accountable level of government that acts within the parameters of its government legislation. Our enabling legislation is the Cities Act. It outlines the powers, responsibilities, and governance structure for cities in the province. It provides the legal framework and guidelines for municipalities to function, enabling them to govern themselves, manage their finances, and plan for development and engage their communities. The Cities Act states the council shall establish a records retention and disposal schedule, and all documents of the city must be dealt with in accordance with that schedule. The City of Saskatoon City Council has delegated that responsibility to the city clerk. So the City of Saskatoon Council, so records management and information falls under the city clerk's umbrella. As far as privacy, we are governed by Local Authority Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, so LaFoIP. It has two main goals: protecting privacy by making sure personal information is kept safe, and not used or shared without permission or legal authority. And 2, ensuring freedom of information by allowing individuals to access city data and their own personal information held by the city. So LFWIPE establishes how the city may collect and use people's information within reasonable boundaries, share and protect personal information, and grant individual access to that information. So yeah, here you go.
Thanks, Ruth Ann. Dan, did you need me to repeat the question?
No, I think I'm good. I have it here in front of me, which is helpful. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As Susan mentioned, I am currently with the eHealth Saskatchewan, which is a Treasury Board crown, I believe. And essentially, the mandate of eHealth Saskatchewan has essentially been to primarily been an IT technology program and service support to the health sector agencies across the province of Saskatchewan. Big players now like, Saskatchewan Health Authority, SaskCancer, 3S Health, those types of organizations. And it really is just assisting them with all kinds of programs, services, new platforms, and so on that allow for access to health information. Delivering services virtually now seems to be, something that's going to grow in popularity. My place in the organization is I belong to the Strategic Planning and Corporate Governance Unit, and we have a mandate to build some information governance and records management standards across eHealth as an organization. There has been a number of initiatives over within the last 10 years, but often these things can get stalled with changes in personnel, and there was this thing called COVID, so that kind of sort of put those things on hold for a while. But now we're sort of reintroducing that, so it's really beginning from the ground up, which is sort of exciting. And primarily the legislation we'll deal with as we move through this initiative is, of course, FOIP and HIPAA primarily, because we deal with a lot of health information from both partners and within the organization. There'll be instances where our own organization will have that information. So those are primarily the pieces of legislation with which we'll focus. That's it.
Thanks. Welcome, Dan. And now we have Kayla.
Hi, everyone. So I work for Saskatchewan Government Insurance, which is SGI. For those that don't know, SGI has 2 distinct functions, so we're a little unique. We have the Saskatchewan Auto Fund, which is our Saskatchewan auto insurance, driver's licensing, and vehicle registration system. And then we also have kind of the private part of our company, SGI Canada, where we deliver property and casualty insurance in Saskatchewan, but then we also operate in other provinces. So we operate in BC, Alberta, Manitoba, and Ontario. So because we're operating in different provinces, we actually follow the different regulations, privacy regulations in those provinces. So we're a little unique for government. We are Crown company as well. So in BC and Alberta, we follow PIPA. They each have their own acts. So PIPA BC, PIPA Alberta, and then in Saskatchewan, similar to Dan, we follow FOIP and HIPAA. And then in Manitoba and Ontario, we follow PETA.
Great. So the next question kind of will build upon what we have already started here. So we would like to know more about your specific role and how your role works with the privacy within your organization, and also how your role is affected by privacy. So Ruth Ann, we'll start with you.
Okay, so kind of to explain it from the top down, our city clerk, is Adam Tittlemore. Under him we have 2 deputy city clerks, one Shelley Brandt, Director of Legislative Services. They take care of anything City Council. And then we have Deputy City Clerk, Director of Information Governance, Sarah Sleva, and under her is our Privacy Officer, who is Rebecca Crookshanks. So we are also our little section, Records and Information Management, is also part of the Information Governance umbrella. And my specific role is Corporate Records and Information Analyst. I am one of 2 analysts. And so our shared responsibilities that are specific to privacy. So we assist in responding to access and information requests by the privacy officer. Often we search the electronic records management system. We also assist the records coordinators across city departments, often if they need help to search as well. Sometimes we recall records for them from the record center if needed, often to find things. We are responsible for training as well. So we train the records coordinators and employees how to use electronic records management system, which is Documentum. That's what we use. We train them how to access records off site. We have a RIM 101, which covers records management policy, roles and responsibilities, access and privacy, which we invite our privacy officer to. And we also assist the privacy officer with creating training materials for her citywide training, which includes privacy basics, privacy breach reporting and snooping. We assist the privacy officer by also completing pre-privacy assessments to determine if city projects will require a full privacy impact assessment that will be conducted by the privacy officer. So those are some of the duties that we share in regards to privacy.
It's like a never-ending list. Job's not privacy, but it's there all the time, hey?
Yeah, that's just part of our job.
Yeah. All right, Dan.
Thanks, Susan. Well, essentially, my role here in eHealth as it relates to the privacy unit, actually, I think I'm in a pretty useful spot because it's our information governance initiative is sort of beginning from the ground up. I have the luxury of being able to work with pretty closely a privacy and access unit that's pretty mature. They've had, they've sort of, because there was, in the absence of a kind of a records management, unit, they became sort of a de facto resource for a lot of the agencies' questions and concerns and just perspectives on record keeping as it related to privacy and access, of course, but then it just sort of gave, it provided some context for record keeping generally. So I think what it means now is that I'm able to work very closely with the privacy and access unit, and they are looking to have been so far a pretty good ally in just talking about how to, piggyback off the kind of initiatives and the sort of, respect that they have within the organization here. They've often been asked throughout throughout the work they do here, they're often and always asked for privacy impact assessments, whether there's the acquisition of new programs or new services that are being talked about, software applications that are being considered, even in policy development in all areas. That they're always at the table for those discussions around what's the privacy's perspective. And in the 2 years that I've been here, the privacy director has made a point of keeping me in the loop as to what things might be going on in the organization that will have some records management implications. And she'll share that with me, and just sort of check to see if I am aware of these things going on, because she knows full well that we are still trying to develop some awareness here that there is this initiative and there are these standards that we're sort of trying to build. And similarly, I find now that when I'm being tasked with looking at the information government perspective of new products or services. For instance, we have a M365 acquisition and rollout that's just occurred recently. I suspect it's similar with your organizations, a new cloud-based alternative to on-premise, use of Microsoft tools. I often will then go to privacy and get a sense from them if what their perspective is on these things, and certainly share in terms of the information that helps to have that has some records management implications. And what's really cool, this is completely by accident, but I'm not surprised, but the privacy analysts folks, they talk a lot about record keeping just in their own work, right? And of course it is directed by privacy, but they're so in tune with the notion of certainly around the subject of over retention, and why you collect information the way that you do. And that's particularly helpful here in this organization because maybe like other organizations, there's probably a lot of over retention here that's been going on with respect to records and data, just because, a lack of standards and a lack of perhaps confidence of when you should get rid of information. So of course the default becomes, well, let's just keep it indefinitely. And often if it's an electronic record, you can archive it, and that's small a archive, not big capital A archive. So I think given that's the context we work in, and I feel that the privacy unit, because of its maturity here and the fact that I am pretty confident that when I need to tap into them as an ally, they're going to be very helpful and very useful. And as a kind of reward for that good behavior on their part and wanting to play, they are one of the first units that we targeted to say, okay, well, part of our work is we have to create record schedules, as you know, and that requires a business assessment of the kind of record keeping they do anyway. And so they're one of the first units who are undergoing that assessment themselves, with their folks seeing what is it they create, where do they have it. And that's always fun because, it reveals their own record keeping tendencies, which are, kind of similar, right? We keep things and we keep them for a long time. Although they are pretty good about looking at, the implications of over retention for their own business purposes. When the task has been accomplished as it relates to an FOI request, they are happy to see a future where they have a standard that says, okay, you can dispense with this now. It's accountable and defensible. So they are eager folks to join in our initiative with respect to records management standards. So I'm looking forward to lots of interaction on that basis. And if I can, if I have an opportunity to build the resources here within this unit, I'm going to poach from the privacy folks because they got some good folks there anyway. So.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, as you're saying, it just feels a lot like privacy and records is like a blurred line between them. It's like, are they separate? They're not really all that separate. So yeah, Kayla.
Well, at SGI, our privacy and information management department are one. So we are very closely connected. I'm the director of information management, and then we have a director on the privacy side of things and the ethics side of things. So as my role, I'm really looking to consult and support information management activities across the corporation, and then ensuring that regulatory compliance to information management related legislation And then there's the privacy director that would be kind of just flip it, throw in some privacy words there, and same type of responsibility. So we have two teams, but our teams overlap in so many initiatives. Similar to Dan, we are a little bit further behind in the information management maturity, as the privacy department is much more mature. They've got more sophisticated processes, and I think they're just a more respected area. And I think that's just the common trend in industry. I think information management, as we've moved to different technologies, the demand in information management has skyrocketed, and people have realized the importance of having good practices in their organizations. And I think that really often relates to the privacy risks. So we often try to relay our value with privacy risks, because people understand privacy risk a lot easier. And similar to what Dan was saying, is if you don't keep things forever, then you have less information, less risk, less FOIable material, that type of thing. So we really do try to work together to integrate the risks so that people understand how information management practices can support good privacy. As far as how our teams work together, we work together on initiatives, on training. We often do like training collaboratively. So we'll give a privacy and IM session at the same time. We train our managers together. We look at risk evaluation, projects. Privacy is in the project, but IM isn't. They're looking out for privacy and vice versa. So sometimes some of the more privacy focused individuals will come and they'll have an IM concern that they happen to hear in a meeting or something like that. So there is a lot of looking out for each other's interests and then making sure that they're raising those to the appropriate groups. We've also started to integrate information management into our PIA process. So we're looking at things right at the beginning and trying to get in some of that information management best practices right at the beginning of the project, how privacy's been doing it probably for years. So that's where I think our areas, it's beneficial to have the groups together. And then it's also good because you've got that cross training on the different initiatives as well. So you've got more people in the company looking out for both needs. So that's how we work over here at SGI.
That's great. All right, we're just going to move on to the next one. So, which privacy laws are you all keeping an eye on right now? Or are there any changes in privacy laws right now that are influencing your information management? And we're going to go to Dan for this one first.
Thanks, Susan. Okay, well, not surprisingly, the piece of legislation that we're most focused on right now is the new HIPAA regulations that just came out for Saskatchewan. Not surprisingly, again, both the privacy director and myself, we were both became aware of it on the same day. And I think I ran over to her office before she came over to see me. God, I need to get out more. That's so exciting. But anyway, the reason it caught our notice is the fact that there's a number of things within the regulations now which are very, very helpful going forward, and especially in the context of working with eHealth now. Basically, there's really 4 things, I suppose, that I could name, and I'll try not to scoop either Kayla or Ruth Ann, but the regulations prescribe a retention period, which is pretty useful. Okay, and I do think, I suspect that the regulations, the actual retention period was based on the Hospital Standards Act here that was from the 1980s, because it gives a 10-year retention period for clinical documents, medical records. I'm just guessing. I don't know that for sure, but that seems to me that I wouldn't be surprised if that's where that came from. At any rate, the other important thing about the regulations is they allow for an option to that retention period, and that, of course, is based on if you have a records schedule in your organization that states why you may have a different retention period with personal health information, whether it's more than 10 years or less than 10 years. That's going to be helpful. And the other important part is the regulations prescribe a disposal process, disposal standard process, and more importantly, the documentation of that process. And that might be a direct impact of discussions with the provincial archives of Saskatchewan. I don't know that either, but I'm just shilling for them if they're on the line, that maybe people have been listening to them or something, just in terms of their own practices. At any rate, that combination of language in the regulations is going to be very helpful here, because, as I mentioned before, typically we have lots of information that's been held on for probably a bit too long. And certainly in our discussions around record keeping generally, information governance, it seemed to be that there was this sort of historical expectation or presumption here that, oh, well, if it has anything to do with health information, oh, you keep it forever. That's just indefinite. Everybody knows that. And it's like, okay, well, it was hard to determine where was that determined, decided on, and written down anywhere. So this provides a pretty useful, compelling, and defensible counter argument to that notion. It's like, really, there's a purpose for which the information is retained, and when it's reached that purpose, then it's time to move it off. Again, to protect privacy, personal health information, as anything else. And the fact that I'm going to find that very helpful in terms of the work that I will do, even within eHealth as an organization, because again, we do collect records that have personal health information in them, but not necessarily for a clinical service delivery or something, unlike a lot of the partners like Sask Health and Sask Cancer and so on. But it will be a useful tool to be able to say, look, we know we have, in this particular instance, privacy, in fact, is the example. We know privacy will have access requests, and often that request will contain information of a requester's personal health. And privacy recognizes that they get to use that exception. They get to say, we're not keeping that for 10 years because it's not to do with a clinical service delivery. It's to do with an FOI request. So we're going to put a different retention period on it, less than 10 years for sure. So there's a good example for how that's going to work in a real world example for privacy in this case. And then that will become a good example to show other business units that, look, at this is what it means by the exception. So it's a piece of legislation that's pretty visionary, that's a bit too much. It's pretty helpful, but I think long overdue, perhaps, and in recognition that personal health information retention has been overdone, perhaps, for a time. So this will give folks a real good way to move forward, and I'm looking forward to having that as a useful, argument, a useful tool to persuade folks that, look, there is a standard, and it's when we can reach. And eHealth will build that in their own record schedules, and certainly as we work with partners, when we talk about record keeping, I mean, it's up to them to decide, but this also helps if they're not aware of that that new regulation. That'll be helpful to share with them as well. So yeah, that's all I got to say on that.
Thanks. I know it's so helpful to have something to point to, say, no, delete it. Just delete it. So Kayla, same question.
So for us, like I had mentioned, we follow different legislation across the country. We also are looking at the HIPAA changes and looking at some of those. It's very prescriptive. So the prescriptive requirements of, you have to have this retention time, and if you don't have this time, you have to explain why you're keeping it any longer than that. So it's very prescriptive, having privacy legislation with information management requirements. So it's unique in that landscape, and I think that's something why we're keeping an eye on all of the legislation. The HIPAA changes also have a requirement that your company has to have a policy for destruction. So you have to outline how you're doing your destructions, if it's an appropriate method, and that it's secure, etc. So that's another more information management type of requirement that's in a privacy legislation. So those are some of the things we're keeping an eye on with the HIPAA changes and making sure that we're meeting those requirements. I'm going to kind of shift to PETA, because that's one that we follow in Ontario and Manitoba, and it's the federal legislation. So it's the Personal Information Protection and Electronics Document Act for Canada. The provinces that have similar regulations, they can follow what their regulations. So that's where we get the FOIP and the HIPAA in Saskatchewan and the PIPA in Alberta and BC. So as long as that legislation is equivalent or very similar, then the provinces can have their own regulation. So with this change in Saskatchewan, we're expecting similar changes with PIPEDA. So they're already working on what PIPEDA might look like in a couple of years. So they're looking at the Digital Charter Implementation Act, which would be the overarching act, essentially, of the following 3 acts that would be part of it. So there'd be the Canadian, what's it called? Canadian Privacy, CPPA. I'll have to find it because I have my notes and I just have all the abbreviations, but it's essentially what's going to replace PIPEDA. And it's going to talk a little bit more about what anonymize versus de-identify is, and how that relates to destructions. It's going to require, likely similar to HIPAA, the policies for retention and destruction. So how are you doing it securely? Making sure that there is those policies in place. There's likely going to be, again, similar to HIPAA, is the requirements for retention and destructions for sensitive information, for personal information. There's probably going to be requirements around automated decision making and how automated decision making is used, and what that means for, FOI type of purposes. And the one thing that I'll mention is the Electronic Documents Act of PIPEDA is likely going to remain independent of this act and be separated out. The other part of these changes is the Tribunal Act that would fall under the main overarching act, and that act is essentially giving order-making powers and fines in place. So some of the PIPEDA, the acts today for privacy and even information management are a little weaker with how much power they have to make people follow them. So the order-making powers and the fines are going to be substantial to make sure that people are following the acts. And then there's ADA, which is the AI part of the privacy. So it's the Artificial Intelligence Act, and that one is very in its early stages. So there's not really a lot to mention on it because it is still ever changing. It likely is gonna have some of the similar elements as the AI Act that's in the EU. One of the things that we likely are expecting to see is record keeping systems to demonstrate compliance with ADA. So how that's going to work. And like I said, we are expecting the decision making from AI to be part of one of these acts. So making sure that there's transparency in how the robots are making decisions about people, essentially. So those are some of the things that we are keeping an eye on. Likely, if PIPEDA changes, we are either going to see a change with the Alberta and BC legislation, and I guess provincially in Saskatchewan as well, or they might just be following the new provincial act. So this is something we're expected in 2025. But I think with kind of going back with Dan, like the HIPAA regulation changes, we're just seeing a lot more prescriptive requirements for information management in privacy legislation. So if we can get on board and make sure we've got the policies in place and we're following the requirements in HIPAA, it's going to better prepare us when we see those other changes come out as well in the PIPEDA. And the CPPA is the Consumer Privacy Protection Act. So apologies because I had all of the abbreviations. So we've got a few members of our team keeping a really close eye on some of those changes, but I'll say it's exciting to see some prescriptive language in privacy legislation for information management. I think this is a new trend, and I think it helps to promote and it helps our maturity. It helps us to really get that backbone. So back to you, Susan.
Thanks. Yeah, again, I said, like, if we have those rules essentially provided for us, it just makes our job a little easier. Makes it easier for us to kind of enforce some of those things. And Ruth Ann.
Okay, so there are many different governing bodies across the departments that it's a little overwhelming to keep track of all of them. The city has many different functions. For instance, the Water Security Agency governs our water treatment plant. The Planning and Development Act governs the Planning and Development Department, and so on and so on. So all of these have different IM requirements, and these need to be reflected in our retention schedule. We are currently in the process of obtaining a solution for citation tracking to help keep track of all of these. That will tie into our classification and retention guide, which we are also in the process of updating from a subject-based to a functional classification system. So we have lots of changes coming up for our department. We find too that we have updated last year in March our records and information management policy. We find this internally kind of helps it states the responsibilities kind of everyone within the corporation of how to handle records. So that kind of helps too. It's not a law, but we do. It's part of the whole process. So everybody's kind of on the same page in regards to records.
Did you just stop talking or are you just done?
No, I'm done.
I don't want to interrupt you.
No.
Wonderful. Apologize. Okay, so then we're going to move on to our final question, and we're doing good for time so that looks like we will have some time for questions at the end. So how are you utilizing privacy law to influence your information management programs? Kayla, you are first.
Sure. So I kind of mentioned how it's exciting to have these prescriptive requirements in the legislation. And I think just overall information management, again, the maturity has been a lot further behind than privacy. So having this, it really just, you can't really argue with it. It's like, we need to have these policies and this needs to happen because it's now part of the law. So it is nice to see that. I mean, it is also a challenge because now you have to do all of these things officially. So yeah, I think just having as part of the law and being able to raise that awareness, on our end, we are starting to raise that awareness all the way up the chains, just to say, this is what we're expecting to see happening. We're keeping an eye on the legislation. This is how we can get ahead of it. So making sure our policies and our standards align. And I think it's just helping to leverage privacy to get more traction for information management. And I think when we look at, even just consumers, our customers, our employees, I think it's much easier to understand privacy. Like, everybody has their own personal information and you can kind of relate to how is your stuff being stored or shared or whatever else. So I think people relate to privacy a lot easier than information management. And we're like, you should keep it for this long. And they're like, okay, whatever. I think the retentions are just not as, looking at the life cycle of information, it doesn't resonate as much with people. So really just trying to link in that privacy and use privacy as much. Sounds like we just use privacy all the time, but we help them too. But just trying to help use their risks to move the needle for information management. So that's how we really work closely together and are really working to, we still want to mature privacy, but bringing both areas together and outlining risks that affect both. And ultimately, I think for most people, the retention life cycle, the ending part has always been a struggle. Like, we have all this information that's been kept forever. So I think being able to finally finish the life cycle and be able to destroy information as per retentions, having the proper documentation to show that it's been destroyed. I know it's kind of exciting place to kind of move the needle for information management. So I'll stop talking. I'll hand it over back to you, Susan.
I was gonna say it's like freeing just to be able to delete stuff, hit that button and go, we're sending this away. And it's okay to do it. We're gonna be okay. So, so Dan, nope, you're not next. We're gonna go to Ruth Ann first.
Okay, so how does privacy law influence our programs? So under the privacy officer, she is responsible for establishing the access and privacy management program framework, which operationalizes LaFoIP across all city civic departments, divisions, and offices, and also for assisting in ensuring that the city's collection, use, and disclosure of information and records complies with legislation. So this does very much tie in with records management. How are we using our information? How are we protecting our information? All employees are responsible for learning about the Act and by participating in compliance training. So we do have compliance training that is mandatory for privacy for all employees at the City of Saskatoon who deal with records or information with their job, which is pretty much everyone with a desk job. This does tie in with records management. One of our courses is about privacy breach training. What happens when there's a breach? What do you do? Who do you report to? All these kinds of things. And one of the things that is mentioned is do good records management. If you want to know how to avoid a breach, then make sure that you're doing good records management. So this certainly does tie in to records management and is everyone's job across the city.
That just seems like a simple answer. You don't want to breach, just do good records. Oh, okay then. Solved. Problem. The world's problems are solved with us, right? All right, Dan.
Thanks, Susan. Well, I don't want to repeat myself, but really, I think the HIPAA legislation is going to be prominent in any kind of discussions we have going forward with our business units, because in a way it allows us to begin that conversation with have you got any private personal health information and data that we need to be concerned about right away? And it's kind of an opening where it'll compel them to sort of look at what they have and figure out how integrated or not that information might be, of course, because we're dealing with lots of digital record keeping and digital data here that is in old and new sort of database, Excel spreadsheets, sort of things like that. So I think it'll be the key part of being able to begin these conversations. And what will be revealed probably is again this expectation, presumption that there's been a lot of over retention and in some cases indefinite retention in a lot of places, right? And so as Kayla has described observed a number of times, the prescriptive elements of this regulation, this legislation, will be very helpful to just get over that having to convince folks that there's something useful about this. It's just like, ultimately this is how we have to sort of approach record keeping and information governance now. In our particular instance, just as a real world example, again, we've rolled out very recently M365 platform for SharePoint sites, OneDrive, email, and so on. We can the discussion of what to do with the records that get created on those platforms is going to become the subject of, similarly, we can use HIPAA to start talking about those things as a way of actually maybe compelling folks to look at those platforms and convince them that in some instances, if you're collecting personal health information in your chat because you're talking about a client or something, we can have those discussions around, okay, look, if that needs to be somewhere else in a more appropriate record keeping tool, because chat isn't a tool, like email platform is not a record keeping tool. That I think it'll be the compelling nature of that legislation that will help us again to sort of get over this discussion about saying, well, it's okay to keep it there because, it's all got e-discovery as part of a functionality of the system anyway. And it's like, well, that doesn't help with a FOIP request anyway, if you still got to look at all that data. So again, with the risk of sort of repeating myself, we are going to make use of both the privacy team as an ally, and then this particular legislation as a really good, consistent beginning of our discussions with these with business units in order to figure out how to do this within eHealth, and by implication too, as they have to work out retention periods with the partners that we support in terms of the health sector. So I think the timing of this is pretty useful. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to sort of have a really good example of what it means to have allies in privacy. And boy, if people know privacy is coming to see them, they start to get worried. I'm happy to piggyback on that kind of concern and respectability, right? Because we all struggle with this often this challenge we have about, well, it's we can keep everything forever, and especially as electronic data goes, it's all just about storage space. But that's just not a business efficient way to move things. So I think this is a great opportunity, and I hope folks out there. I'm particularly interested in what Kayla was describing about the federal regulations as well. I know it made me think, oh, is eHealth actually subject to any of that? And I just think the fact that awareness is useful. We may not be, but I like the fact that there's a new piece of information that might be worth exploring. Maybe there's folks on the call in other parts of Canada for whom that's got some relevance. So that would be neat to see if that influences how we go forward. Back to you, Susan.
Yeah, well, that wraps it up. I was just going to say working at the university, the retention is a same mentality of just keep everything forever because they just keep adding space. But then we run into the issue of like, is this a record that does need to be kept, or is it actually historic? So then we do need to keep it because it is a historic record. So whole other world. Maybe someone will help us one day. So that wraps up our main part. And if there's questions, we can throw it at everyone. If you want to put your questions in the chat, I can.
Well,
them.
yeah, it doesn't look like anybody put one in chat, but I can ask a question or two if you'd like.
Wonderful. Do it.
Okay, so actually kind of going back into earlier in the presentation, one of the big topics was the idea of PIAs, the privacy impact assessments that you kind of have to do all the time. Now, I know we have a lot of technical people, and me especially going through PIA process, it's usually around software acquisitions and things like that. But I was very interested when Ruth Ann, you were talking about the PIAs you do for other things that are not just things like software acquisitions and security type of things. How are PIAs being used, and what kind of like items are in those for something that's outside of what we might be thinking a typical PIA might be for what you deal with in your organizations?
Pretty much. So IT, it's through IT. They kind of play a big role in it as well. So updating a software program, or there's all kinds of things. I think all city projects kind of are supposed to filter through, updating processes. And CCTV things, monitoring, really anything is can be should go through the PIA process. Not everything requires a full PIA, but as long as people are thinking about privacy and thinking about yes, we had one for body worn cameras that came through. So things like that. What is being done with that information is a question. Certainly, I would definitely flag that one as a full PIA to go to our privacy officer, and then she would take that and do the full PIA and just make sure people, how is that information being collected? Why is it being collected? And how long are we keeping that info for, and what are the reasons, and making sure that that information is protected. Did that answer it?
Yeah, that did.
Can I jump in as well on that question?
Yeah.
Just because we at SGI were trying to integrate information management into the PIA process, and there was a couple kind of questions before, but we've developed an IM section essentially, and the privacy impact assessments essentially are evaluating any project that has personal information. So any of those projects, they'll determine long PIA, short PIA, no PIA. But the IM, we decided to add the IM assessment in part of the privacy assessment as like our initial maturity. So at least we're able to get IM assessment on the projects that have to do a PIA. It was just too big of a leap to just say like, now we have an IM assessment for every single project. So it's at least an opportunity. And in some cases they might say, well, there's no PIA required, but here's the IM assessment. So it's just like that first phase in our maturity. And we're looking at all corporate information. So is there corporate records? Is there non-records? Is there transitory information? And how are you managing it? So it's not just like sitting there forever. So that's something that we've added into our PIA process.
Yeah, the only other option
I
I
have a
was
question,
thinking of.
Troy, that I would love to ask the panel. The word that came out strongest to me during today's session, and I appreciate that very much, is the word over retention. And that when I think of over retention, I always think of those projects that everybody's always wanted to do, like cleaning up shared drives and that kind of thing. But it was always such a difficult task and took so long that nobody had the time or effort or people or money to go and deal with that issue. And really that we all know that because everybody's still got their shared drives. Everybody's got the same problem. Now they have more though. They have SharePoint and they have team sites, and it's just added to the pile. But on top of that, I wanted to ask, I think AI will help considerably in these situations in trying to do these jobs that were always too hard to do manually before. And my question is, are your organizations, or would they be open to using AI to deal with some of those tasks that are currently being done? It's fine to say, yeah, we have AI capabilities now, it'll help us, but will the organization actually allow AI to be used internally at this time, or will that take a while? How do you feel about that?
I can jump in. I think absolutely AI is going to help with those tasks and those things that were difficult to do in the past. And I know there's different software you can purchase already, but AI is only as effective as how well you train it. So I think, yes, AI can solve a lot of problems, but I think there's this misconception, with ChatGPT, you just put in your question and just spits it out. But when you start looking at specific scenarios, work related, you don't just have this already built AI. You're likely having to build an AI with, the trainable information so that it's giving you accurate classifications and stuff like that. So I think AI is probably in everybody's future. It's just a matter of the resources to put forward on it.
Are you muted, Susan? We can't hear you. It looks like you're not muted in Zoom, but yeah, I can hear you. I think you were reading the question in chat. Somebody had a question here for records managers. There are specific professional courses or certifications around privacy that people would recommend? Rick, you might know a couple of those as well too, the IPAs and that as well. You're muted as well, Rick. Nope, still muted. Oh, it looks like we're having a problem.
Right, sorry.
There you go. Do you have any of the courses or certifications that people should take around privacy?
Yeah, well, I mean, the biggest player in that game right now is IAPP in the US. That's the kind of 800-pound gorilla of the training groups. They're kind of a money-making organization. They're not a .org or anything like that. They're making like a money hand over fist. There is an IAPP/C, which is Canadian privacy training, but that's certainly the biggest player in that kind of for-profit training area for privacy. And if you talk to anybody in North America, that's kind of where they go ultimately for training for the privacy stuff. I would applaud the provincial privacy commissioners in every province and territorial government to add more opportunities for training for the people in the provinces and territories, because the cost of taking the training courses from IAPP or probably others is not really inexpensive. And there's a broader range of people that need to be trained in privacy now than ever. I was really thrilled to hear that privacy is so well developed, even compared to records management. Like I hadn't really thought about that before. And I just heard it from everybody today that privacy is pretty well developed in most organizations, and I think that's just great. And I think if that comes out on this panel, then it's probably true across the country. So I'm thrilled that that's the case. And if they're gonna, if as you say, Dan and Ruth Ann and Kayla, if they say that's helping records and information management, I'm more than thrilled that that the privacy will actually help drive back that point of cleaning up things in a records and information management space too. I think it's great.
Kayla?
I just want to add too, so the IAPP also has a certification on AI. So AI governance, one that has recently come out. I know I've taken the IAPP privacy course. There's also courses depending on what you want to do, but there's a lot of courses offered through the universities on privacy and information management certificates. The University of Alberta has a course that a lot of people have taken in our privacy group. And there's also, you had mentioned, governments. I know the government of Saskatchewan has a free privacy and access course that you can take online. So there's a few different options, I think, out there.
Yeah, I think if I could blow the ARMA horn, because we're kind of a made up of ARMA chapters in Canada, the IMCanadaConnect thing. The certificate course at ARMA has been recently updated for records and information management in the bookstore. And it seems to be very popular across North America, actually, for anybody I talk to. Many people are in the process of taking that particular certificate course. It's not a certification, it's a certificate course. So very, very popular across North America as well.
And I know a couple people in here are very good at making internal training material. Ruth Ann and Kayla, we've seen some of yours and talked about the material you guys have made in your organizations. Yeah.
Fact of life, you have to make training material that actually works with the people in your organization.
Yeah.
Well, we're pretty much on time now at the top of the hour. I wanted to first of all thank Susan for being the focal point of the team here today, and all the people on the panel, and specifically the Saskatchewan chapter for stepping up to do the January IMCanadaConnect presentation this year. Next month's presentation will be ARMA Vancouver. Andrew Geider will be doing a presentation also related to privacy. That stuff should be out within the next week or so. So you'll see that information coming up. Please sign in for that. thanks again for supporting IMCanadaConnect. We really appreciate it. It's helped everyone, all of our community across the country to grow stronger, and particularly after COVID. So thanks everybody for that support. And that's pretty much all for today. Susan, any final words on the day's panel?
Still not working.
Oh,
No.
I guess that means no, Susan. Okay, thanks
Yes,
everybody, and we'll look forward to seeing you in next month's IMCanadaConnect presentation.
Okay, thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Troy.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.
Thank you.